Hello everyone, welcome to another GoDaddy Pro EMEA Meetup. Today is 14th November and we are very happy to see you again, and the topic we're going to be talking about actually inspires us all to sit here and see the possibilities. If you'd like to learn more about GoDaddy Pro and how GoDaddy Pro can save time for web developers and designers, please check out the link in the chat. Also, please feel free to introduce yourself or ask questions. This session will be recorded, and the recording will be available in 48 hours at our GoDaddy Pro YouTube channel. You also have the link to this if you'd like to refer later to it. But we will also send an email reminder to everyone who RSVP'd for the event, because we'd like you to check this out. It might change your life. Also, you should get a survey email. Please answer a couple of questions for us. Oh, just a second. I think my sound is right. It's okay, right? You can hear me well.
Yeah, you're good.
I'm just checking, just in case. So today we have Rizel Scarlett, Joe Dolson, and Courtney Robertson with us. And the topic is the GitHub Sponsors Program that is there to enable open source community to grow, as well as the contributors. So just to give a bit of an intro, I'll just mention a couple of things about GitHub Sponsors Program, so you will be able to follow us throughout the questions. So the GitHub Sponsors allows the developer community to financially support the people and organizations who design, build, and maintain the open source project they depend on directly on GitHub. Anyone can sponsor a sponsored developer profile or a sponsored organization profile on behalf of your personal account or an organization. You can choose from multiple sponsorship tiers with one-time or monthly payment amounts and benefits that are set by the sponsored account. Your sponsorship will share your account's existing billing date, payment method, and receipt. Anyone who contributes to an open source project and lives in the supported region is eligible to become a sponsored developer. Contributions include, but are not limited to, bug reports, issues triage, code, documentation, leadership, business development, project management, mentorship, and design. If you live in a region that isn't already supported by GitHub sponsors, you can sign up for the waitlist to participate in beta of the GitHub sponsors. So I think there's a lot to grasp here and understand, but I'm just happy to give you an introduction. But before we move to questions, I would really like to first say hello to our guests and ask them to introduce themselves to us. Courtney, you might want to start. Thank you.
Oh, sure. So I am Courtney Robertson. I am a developer advocate at GoDaddy Pro, and broadly as part of the open source community, but oftentimes focused in WordPress. I am one of the team reps for the training team in WordPress. There are 21 teams that comprise WordPress. And I landed at GoDaddy because I spoke to our manager and said, hey, I'm teaching at a boot camp. I would love to give a lot of my effort into what's going on the training team. But, I have a home and a family and things, and so I need a way to make that happen. So that opened up some conversations, and I get to contribute to the WordPress project and open source more broadly. And that's my journey into GoDaddy. So it's been a fun time. And I have encountered Rizel a few different conferences. Mostly I've been online, Rizel. One day we'll hopefully meet in person, but at a lot of the DevRel, Dev Advocate type of things and or open source lately. So Rizel, can you introduce yourself? Unmute. Sorry.
Can't hear me still?
There you go. You're good.
Right. Sorry. I guess there was a lag, but yeah, that was really awesome to hear about how you got into GoDaddy. But yeah, my name is Rizel. I'm a junior developer advocate at GitHub. I've been here for a little over a year, maybe a year and 1 month, and I have crossed paths with Courtney quite often, which is great. And how I got into this role at GitHub is I was a software engineer before, and I was also on the side helping teach like women of color and non-binary people of color how to code. And then I was like, I wish I could do this, but like for not a nonprofit, for a little bit more money. And I found out it's a real role that you can like teach other developers. So yeah, that's how I got into this job, and I'm excited to talk to y'all about GitHub sponsors.
Oh, I'm looking forward to it. Before we get there, we would like Joe to actually introduce himself. Thank you, Joe.
Yes, well, so I've known Courtney for a long time, but this is the first time I've met Maya or Rizel. I'm a long-time WordPress core contributor. I've been contributing fairly heavily for about 10 years. I'm a core committer. I'm a member of the accessibility team and do a lot of leading of projects for trying to make aspects of WordPress more accessible. I'm also a professional accessibility consultant, and I run my own business providing those services and development services to people who want more accessible plugins, themes, websites, or whatever tool they need used, primarily in the WordPress ecosystem.
How cool is that? Right? If you're enabler to enablers, I mean, that's great. So let me start with my first question. I mean, all three of you are contributors, active ones. You contribute in different way to open source. So my question would be, why do you contribute, and how did you start to contribute?
Well, I'll start since it's silent. So I got started contributing because, so in 2012, one of the big complaints about the WordPress system was, it was perfectly possible to make an accessible WordPress theme, but it was impossible to find one, to know whether a theme was accessible in any way whatsoever without doing, extensive individual testing. And so I set about to try and create a program so that there would be, as part of the already existing theme review process, testing of the accessibility level of themes. And so I worked on implementing the accessibility ready theme program. And that was very motivating because it wasn't perfection, because we couldn't test everything about a theme. They still have tons of options. You can still break everything from accessibility, even with a theme that's starting from a base point that is reasonably accessible. But we could at least give some level of testing and have some facets that we were like, okay, this theme definitely meets these criteria. What you do with it from here on, who knows? And so a lot of that motivation came from just being able to provide users of WordPress with information that they needed to improve what they could do.
Very concise and straight to the point. Rizel, what inspired you to start contributing to open source? Did you know how it would end, or what was the starting point?
No, yeah. For me, I kind of didn't really know what open source was at one point. I just didn't really understand the concept at first. I was like, why are people coding for free? I don't understand. I mean, I know people want to do it for fun, but I was very confused. But when I started at GitHub, my manager encouraged me to contribute to open source. He was like, well, you're working at GitHub. This is the home for all open source. You got to try it out. And he had his own project that he was maintaining. I made a contribution, and it was actually really fun. I think initially too, I was a little scared. I think I had tried contributing to open source in the past, but I was not really sure how to navigate the code bases, or I was also nervous that someone will laugh at me. I don't know, what kind of pull request is this? But contributing to his project made me feel more comfortable, and made me feel oh, okay, I realized that this is not a really scary thing. The people in the community, the other contributors, they were super welcoming, and they were great job, this is awesome. So I started contributing to more projects, and I started helping more people to contribute to projects too. And I started to see the value that a lot of even proprietary companies use open source projects to have their own projects or products be powered by it. And I see the value in like all that maintainers are putting in to keep this alive. So yeah.
Awesome. Courtney, how about you? How did your journey start? What inspired you?
So in college, I was one of the few that showed up with a computer in my coding class, and I had a stripped down laptop, which was unheard of in that era. We didn't have computers in our classroom. A friend lent me one, and I was able to survive my first intro to programming class, where most of my classmates were writing with paper and pencil because it was 1999. So I had a Linux-based laptop, and that was my intro to open source. And later I found using Moodle as a computer programming teacher, and I needed to gather my students' work, and I needed some kind of an LMS system. And so I found Moodle, and I started helping answer a couple of questions. And close to that same time, these events called WordCamps had started, and I found using WordPress as a teacher, so I had a blog going on. And I wanted to go to one of these events, but I missed the deadline to get tickets. So I had answered a couple forum questions here and there, but what I would say is my first real effort of contributing was a little self-serving. I wanted into the event. So I contacted the organizer and I said, could I check the guests? Do you have any volunteer roles for this event? And they said, yes, please check our guests in. And so I handled signing all the people in. I got all their name badges, not in any logical order, 5 minutes before they walked in. And thus is the intro to what feels like a chaotic experience sometimes of open source contributing. And not being sure of yourself or knowing anyone, that's a common thing. So that I just jumped right into the deep end and later found the WordPress training team as a educator. And that's been my home for about 8 years now.
What a home you have, let me tell you. It's expanding constantly, and there is more and more people. Today, the main topic is GitHub Sponsors Program. And before we move to different questions and the questions from the chat, Rizel, would you be kind to let us know what GitHub Sponsors is and give us a bit of an latest information from GitHub relevant to people wishing to start their tech career, or perhaps to put their skills to work, or perhaps to help a goal that they would like, or to sharpen their skills. I mean, how GitHub can help a career development of a person in tech.
Yeah, I could talk about those things. So for GitHub sponsors, essentially, similar to the misconception I had in the past that open source was completely like just this free thing that people were doing, like they were just coding for free. While sometimes there is money in open source, and like programs like TideLift, Open Collective, and GitHub sponsors are trying to enable that initiative and making sure that contributors and maintainers get paid for their work. Because like I said earlier, oftentimes proprietary companies are earning money off of your open source projects, and we want to be able to invest back into our users. Like maintainers and contributors are the reason why GitHub continues to grow and to exist. So we want to make sure we're investing in them. So what GitHub sponsors is it's a program. Sorry, I'm like stuttering a little bit, tongue twister. But yeah, it's a program that enables like either individuals or corporations to contribute to financially to a maintainer or core contributor for a project that they're maintaining. So like, let's say you're a company and you're like, yo, I really love that you made this NPM library. We use it all the time. Here's some money to help one, like encourage you to keep going and to also make it sustainable for you. Cause like, these are like secondary things that people are doing maybe after work, or some people do open source full time. So sometimes that's like what they're depending on salary wise. And it's a really good initiative. And you can have, if we have time, I'll show like the presentation of how to set up your GitHub sponsors profile, but you can have two options on like, maybe you have like a financial goal of every month you want to make $1,000. or whatever. Or you can have a different goal of like every month you want to have 5 sponsors, but just showing that so that people feel more encouraged to help contribute and help you reach your goal is super important. And I think it's a great initiative because open source does help you to like gain a bigger job network or career network if you were looking for more jobs, or helps you to get exposure to different tools and technologies that you might not have been using at school or at work and stuff like that. So it just helps to help keep people's careers growing, and also help keep like our software development industry growing as well.
If you'd like to show any PowerPoint presentation or perhaps a web page, we would love that. I think that would give more context to it. And since you can show, since you can represent actually the GitHub as a provider, as a platform for people to enable their career path, I will also then ask Joe to tell me how he started with his journey on, and how actually he became sponsored. So
yeah, getting sponsored, yeah, that's an interesting process, really. It is a long story, really, because I think all of us who get started in open source, you always kind of start just on your own will. There are relatively few people who just get hired by a company and now your job is 100% you're contributing to open source. That's what you're due now. Almost all of us, we got started just by, I want to help out on this project. And then, at least for me, at some point I started to realize, man, I'm really committing a lot of time to this. And so, setting up, I started out by just setting up like a donate page on my website. And it turns out, just getting free will donations on your own website is, patchy at best. I mean, there's no question that it was never going to be something where I could rely on a steady income of any kind. So the GitHub Sponsors Program, when I set that up and just started telling people, hey, I've set up a GitHub Sponsors. If you appreciate my work on WordPress, please help me out. And the goal here is just, it's all about being able to reliably dedicate time to the projects I want to work on without compromising, like Courtney said, without compromising my home and being able to eat or making my clients suffer because I'm like, well, I have to finish this project for open source that I'm doing for free. So I'm sorry, your project is going to launch a month late. That nobody wants that. And so signing up for the GitHub Sponsors Program, it's been really pretty effective. And in part, it's because it's got, that subscription model, and in part because it has this direct connection to what I'm actually doing. Like, if somebody's looking at my GitHub Sponsors page, they're also looking at my GitHub page, which shows what projects I'm committing to and contributing to and what I'm doing and what I'm working on. And it's a very incomplete picture because, in large projects like WordPress, there's also a lot of meetings and conversations and, track tickets that aren't on GitHub that I handle. But it still gives people an entry point into what I'm doing. And I think that's going to be true for anybody who's looking to get sponsored for open source. Is people who want to sponsor you are looking for some degree of evidence of what you're doing. And it's, and this just, I think it's a challenge with the open source world that like lots of people want to get started. And if you're at a point where you want to get started, but you don't have the resources to dedicate to it on your own, that's a real privilege. And I feel like I was extremely privileged, 10 years ago when I started doing this, that I had both the time to do that and the sufficient income to be able to have a stable life while doing it. And I think that's the hardest thing, is to be able to prove yourself into an open source community to a degree where you can get sponsorship. when you don't have those privileges. And I don't know that there's a solution to that, but I would hope that GitHub sponsors at least can give kind of a softer entry point to that, where you can set up this account and start doing something. I don't know. What do you think about that, Rizel?
Yeah, I know that. I hope y'all can hear me. I know they have like improvements that are coming. But I agree. Like, that was another thing with me. I'm like, I can't give my time to open source. Like, I have other responsibilities. And I do think it's opening the door or creating a conversation around like, how can we start supporting these people and enabling them to be able to do all that stuff. And I know they have like things coming up. I'm happy to share my presentation. I think it will be like 10 minutes, hopefully, just to give people more context. And sorry, you're going to see everyone's faces and it's going to be all crazy for a second, but let's see. Hopefully y'all can see my screen in its full screen.
Yep.
Perfect. Cool. So I'm going to quickly talk about like how to set up your sponsor's profile if you're interested and you're like, oh, what Joe got to do is super cool. So basically I called it Get Paid in Open Source. And again, I'm repeating that like there's this misconception that open source work has to be completely free. And like I really believe that open source maintainers and core contributors are the backbone of many engineering ecosystems, but oftentimes like proprietary companies or individuals gain profit, and then maintainers, all they're gaining from it is burnout, which is why I'm really appreciative of programs like GitHub Sponsors, Open Collective, and Tidelift that are all investing in making sure open source contributors and maintainers get paid and get like their money's worth, because that's what they need to help them keep going. Right now, if you are in any of these 68 regions, you are eligible to create a GitHub sponsors profile so that you can earn money to continue to code in open source. So that's from like Argentina to Czech Republic to Egypt to Uruguay. Like, check out all of these lists. And I have a QR code and a link to this slide deck afterwards if you wanted to just go back and double check this. So in order to sign up, you would go to github.com/sponsors/accounts, and then you would see a list of all your eligible GitHub sponsors accounts, and you would click join the waitlist. And in joining the waitlist, so our team is just reviewing to make sure like you're an actual account, you're not like a spam account or something like that, and making sure that you are eligible for everything else, but it should be a pretty quick wait. And a couple of things you can do, you can add in once you're approved, you can add in like these little badges so that people can sponsor you. They can either sponsor you on GitHub Sponsors, or you can add in badges for like Open Collective or any other custom thing that you had. I know Joe mentioned on his website, he used to have a way for people to donate to him. You can add that in the custom section. So the reason I actually made this presentation was actually a while back. I was talking to a past head of DevRel at Stripe, and he said, they're really invested in all of these open source projects, but sometimes maintainers aren't showing their best selves. So it can be really hard to choose like which project should we invest in. So I made this to make sure that I can show y'all how to make your sponsors page appealing and make other individuals or corporations or whoever get excited about investing in your work. So first off, you want to introduce yourself, explain who you are, what your project is about, and why people should invest. And don't be afraid to like make it like your personality shot. It doesn't have to be like super professional. Here's an example of one. There is someone named Monica. She has a really great like introduction. She talks about like she's a software engineer. She also does tutorials and public speaking, and she has a community called React.js developers, and she added in a little AutoCAD of herself, which makes it really cute. And she's like, oh, you can learn more about me here. So this is an example of like how to bring your personality to it so that people know who you are and they know why to get excited about you. Also, you can feature some of your relevant work. So like showing like some impactful repositories that you might have created that people are using. So they're like, oh, cool. Like, Joe, that's the person that made that WordPress template thing or whatever. Or, oh, Courtney, that's the person that's always helping me. And I see their project right there. It doesn't have to be a ton of projects. Even if it's one, that's cool too. Here's an example. We have one of my coworkers, Gregor, he's done a ton of open source work. So he made OctoKit, Probot, Nox, Semantic Release, Octoherd, and all of these things. And he features these because he's like, these are the things I'm proud of, and these are the open source projects that people might be aware of. There's also an opportunity for you to show the Meet the Team section. So if you're an organization and you want your entire organization to get sponsored, because you can either have like individual profiles or organization profiles on GitHub. If it's an organization, it's nice to highlight all the team members or the main team members that are helping to bring this vision to life. And I think it can bring a more human element, because you're like, oh, it's not just this is the Astro project or the GoDaddy or WordPress project. It's like, oh, there's people that are involved in this. So on this next slide, we'll see an example of, this is for a project called DJ Stripe. We have Jerome, Alexander, and Arnab, and it kind of has like a quick description of what they are and what they do. So people can be like, oh, they're into fintech, or they're into startups or Python or whatever. Like, I can relate to that. I want to continue to invest in them. Also, there's this concept of sponsor tiers within GitHub sponsors. So this allows you to create clarity for potential sponsors. So they're not trying to guess how much they should give you. You can specifically say like, hey, I want $5 or $10 or $15, because sometimes people can spend a little bit of time being like, maybe I should give them $100, $1, I don't know. And you don't want them to spend that time wondering like, how much should I give, and then end up having decision fatigue. Here's what the sponsor, and then in addition to the sponsor tier, there's sponsor descriptions where you describe like why this sponsor tier exists or what they may receive from giving that specific amount. And here are some examples of that. So like here on the right hand side, you have like $5 a month for a sponsor, $10 a month, $50 a month, and they describe what you'll get. If you contribute $5 or $10, you're going to receive a sponsor badge on your profile. But if you give $50, they'll prioritize your bug issue that you put in. They'll make sure they fix it. They'll give you customer support and general feedback. They'll receive general feedback from you regularly. Or they can also have the option to just do like a one-time and not a monthly thing, and you could type it in your custom amount, or you can like specify again, just like how it is here. And then also, I think this is one of the last things that you could add to your profile is showing your goals. I think that's really important to show like how much progress you're making, because that'll make people more excited to help you reach your goal. If they see you're like 10% away from your goal, they might be like, you know what, I'm going to help contribute that last 10%. And the goals can be monetary, or they can show the number of sponsors. So when I say monetary and number of sponsors, here's an example. So for Babbel, their goal is to earn $12,000 each month, because they want to pay their 3 maintainers, like their 3 core maintainers. They're going to split that up. So here you can see, oh, they're 14% towards their goal. So maybe I'll be like, you know what, I want to help them to get to 30% or 40% or whatever. And that's a little bit more encouraging for me. Or on the flip side, you can be like Greg Burge, and he could say, you know what, I just have a goal of 50 sponsors. And that's just going to be an achievement for me in my open source career. And then you can be like, you know what, I want to be that next person that helps you get to the next step. And of course, I always encourage people to thank your sponsors afterwards. That will, 1, make them feel like appreciated, and 2, that'll help them keep coming back. And that might even help them to tell other people about you and to bring in more sponsors for you. They might be like, you know what, Joe is so nice. He like thanked me in a tweet or a blog post, made me feel really good. He's doing some awesome work with his project. You should contribute to that too, or you should sponsor that too. And that may encourage them to come in more. So I have a couple examples here. You can do a tweet, a blog post, release announcement. You can highlight them on your README or your website. If you could afford it, you could send them some swag, or you can invite them on a live stream to show how they're using your open source project. There's so many different creative ways. These are just things I've seen other people do. And then I will kind of end with saying, it does seem really kind of cringe to be advertising your sponsors page or to even do any kind of marketing about yourself, but it's not cringe. Like, this is how you continue to learn in public. This is how you continue to level up your career, and you don't have to do it in like a super marketing way. You can just be like, you know what, here's like a challenge I've been having with my open source project, or here's a win I got. And like continuing to do that will keep people feeling invested in your journey and keep them wanting to contribute to you and into your project. And that is it. I will put this link in the comments for people to have it. I hope I didn't take up too much time.
Oh, no, it's great. And I love that you're saying it's not cringe. I think about, Joe, when you first announced that you had sponsorships open. So this crowd that we're hanging with today is largely WordPress focused. And we know that powers now 43% of the internet. Back then it was maybe 25, 30, maybe somewhere in that ballpark.
Who knows?
Yeah. And accessibility matters for lots of web users, but whether it is something like WordPress or other types of projects, there's that fear of it's cringy to put yourself out there like that. That's so true. But at the same time, on the flip side, who's using that tool, that code, and is it worth it to have that be maintained? And I would say that, yeah, it really is. So I love that you said that. It's not cringe. Not cringe.
I have two questions. First question goes to Joe. Joe, you've been sponsored on GitHub Sponsors Program. Were you aware of all these benefits or the way how you should present yourself, or you just kept it to something else?
Oh no, I didn't know about any of that. I am famously terrible at marketing. Marketing is not one of my skills. And also, I joined GitHub Sponsors really early. I mean, I think it was a pretty brand new program when I signed up for it. And, guides as to what you should do and what you should say about yourself, they didn't exist. And so I wrote something up. I don't remember any details, but at some point, somebody actually just gave me feedback on it. I don't even remember who. I'd have to do some research, and suggested ways I could clarify what I'm actually doing and improve it. And I did make those changes. And I don't know whether it's made an impact or not. It's kind of hard to tell, but I would definitely say that, like, knowing, and I've always been somebody who sees it as very cringy to promote myself. And that's a hard thing as somebody who's, been in business on their own as a, freelance and business owner now for almost 20 years. But I hate marketing myself, which is one of the real appeals to the sponsorship thing, is that it's gets a little bit away from the marketing thing. If somebody is just willing to buy into, like, yes, your work is important.
I think, Rizel, after your presentation, whoever has an open account with GitHub and is part of this program will surely rush to fix whatever they can actually in their profiles, including myself. I will do the same. I wasn't aware of all of these tactics that you can use. I think this was very good. What do you think, Courtney?
Yeah, I just set myself a to-do of cleaning up my main profile before the end of the week. No, I will say I am very thankful that I get to contribute as part of my time at GoDaddy. And I recognize that that's not something that everybody gets. Even my coworkers are, some of them have some time on the clock to contribute, and some of them choose to do so on their own time as well. And that's great. It reminds me, I was previously teaching at a boot camp for front-end devs, and I loved the program. It was very much a DEI focus, getting people back into the workforce during the beginning of COVID. And so I did have them set up their WordPress profiles. In hindsight, should have had them give themselves a little bit more oomph to their GitHub profiles in general, but then also create that sponsor, because one of the things I was doing was having them answer a couple simple forum questions and a few things just to sort of start demonstrating that activity. And so that's something that really stood out to me. So I've set myself a to-do for Friday of improving my own personal GitHub profile. And if I ever set it up for accepting donations, you can probably guess that I'm going to flip that back into sending what I can into others that need to be working in the open source space too. Also, Rizel, you sparked an idea that if people are using a few of these other methods of how they get sponsored, such as Open Collective, that they can have that link in their profile as well as part of that sponsor program. And I love that because, you know, through sponsoring an open source, to Joe's point, there is a need for some accountability to know that there's something happening. It doesn't need to be as super heavily managed, does not need micromanaged, but to know that they're doing something with their time towards what they say they're doing. So however that money comes in, if it's linked up in their profiles, and because so many projects are using GitHub as the method of, and even so inside of WordPress, since that might be a little different for us, our newest area that involves when you go to write a post, the way that looks, it's called the block editor. All of that work is happening in GitHub, but the like WordPress dashboard and some of the older parts of WordPress are still happening in a different system. And the two don't talk as thoroughly as they should together. But I love that we could sort of start linking up some of those things, you know, that we could say, here's my other spots where you might see my activity. So if you're donating, here's other places you can reach me to send me money. Here's other places you could see the activity that I'm doing as well and why this matters for this project. So I love that.
Yeah, I love it too. When I found out that you can link it up, I'm like, that's great. I love that GitHub's not like, you can only do this on GitHub. Like you can, there's other options that people may prefer. And I like that.
That's awesome. I have another great question for you. And that's like, in what ways does the open source project, or perhaps GitHub, encourage contributors to continue to give their time and skills in the medium or long term? So, for instance, I'll start with Joe with this question, and I'll be very straightforward. How much does the GitHub encourages you to continue with your efforts? Do you feel that you're empowered from being on GitHub?
That's an interesting question. I mean, because, you know, as Courtney referenced, a lot of WordPress core, I mean, the core management of the software is actually done in Subversion. So an awful lot of the things that I do are actually in Subversion, or they're in Slack, or they're on the Make WordPress network. So actually GitHub is a fairly minor part of my work on WordPress, which is kind of one of those interesting disconnects, because I don't contribute heavily to the block editor. So I don't know that it does a lot on that front for me specifically, you know, because it doesn't connect that closely to my core projects. That said, you know, I am going to probably move a lot of my patch creation into the GitHub workflow, just because it's just easier to run the tests than running the test suite locally is just kind of brutal. And being able to get those tests run through GitHub Actions instead would probably save me certainly a lot of clock cycles. So it might change in the future.
Rizel, what's your opinion? Do you feel, now that you understand the program, you understand the goals, and we already have Joe, who's an experienced contributor and being sponsored as well, how do you think how GitHub encourages people to continue contributing?
Yeah, no, I was thinking as Joe was talking, and one thing is, I know at GitHub Universe we announced that we are starting this GitHub Accelerator, and basically we're going to choose 20 developers globally who are currently maintaining open source projects and want to go full time, and they're going to give them $20K to be able to do that. Applications are open now, y'all. I was just Googling it just a second ago to remember, but yeah, applications are open now and they will close December 31st. So if you're interested in contributing full time and applying, in contributing full time, I would encourage you to apply. And I do think some of the products that like Joe mentioned, GitHub Actions, that was a game changer for me when I discovered it, because I'm like, cool, like I could do releases automated and stuff like that. That helps maintainers. I think also products like Copilot, right? Copilot is free to open source maintainers, so it helps them to like maybe code faster and to be more productive. I know we just gave code spaces 60 hours or something like that worth of, I hope I have the numbers right, worth of code spaces to any GitHub user, which is great because that enables people to code from anywhere and not to have to continue to set up their local environment. So there are built-in features within GitHub. And in addition to that accelerator that we're starting to try to help open source maintainers, and we're trying to continually improve.
Rizel's, we have a long-time WordPress core committer, so somebody that holds almost the top level of keys that they could have for the project, determining when things release. Helen, who you may have met by now. Yep. Helen. And so I shared a link that Helen wrote over on the core team, which would be those that are developing the software. And Helen did share the update about code spaces being available for 60 hours for users, especially when in an open source project. And as part of that, in the post that's in the notes, and we can append that to the relay, she was talking about making a WordPress develop branch specifically for use inside of code spaces. We had seen a demonstration of that in her presentation for WordCamp US 2021, but it would be great to see some more of that. And then we also have in the chat, a couple of other folks are with us. One of our coworkers, Scott Clark, is a PHP dev, works inside of our Pagely division, but in addition is the lead developer for pods.io, which adds custom post types and fields and all the good stuff to WordPress. Scott shared with me, and I hope, Scott, you're okay with this. I think it's fine to probably say this. You mentioned that you got a lot of donations. Scott was one of the recipients, or Pods was, I'm not sure which one, for Indeed's program when Indeed came through and asked about doing some sponsorship opportunities. I think it's around 25 a month ongoing still. And, you know, I'm not sure if Indeed actually uses Pods or not. Pods is Scott's side hustle, we'll say. It's an open source project. I'm not sure. I think Scott puts more into it than Scott receives ever from it. So the community loves Scott for that. But has received funding from Indeed through GitHub sponsorships as well, by just having this amazing tool out there and available that adds a lot of additional functionality to what's going on in WordPress. So it's good stuff.
Congrats.
Glad to see you with us.
I'm not sure, Rizel, that you are actually aware of what GitHub sponsors the program is doing behind the scenes, because it seems that this program is connecting the unconnectable dots before, so it's working very well. I would also like to ask, being a non-coder, personally, I'm not a developer, I'm a marketeer, but I think I sympathize with Stella's comment in the chat. She said, I have similar issue as a non-dev. I contribute to design and documentation in the org and not necessarily to the software. Most of my work is on posts, and I'm having a mental block on what I can give back to sponsors besides the Twitter call out or thank you note. Would there be a way how we can advise people, non-coders, how they can get sponsored on this program, how they can benefit from this program in general? I mean, if we know.
I'm trying to think. I guess maybe you wouldn't be able to necessarily feature the specific repositories, but even still in that introduction blurb that you give, you can be like, I designed the logo for this project and put the link and stuff like that. So still try to highlight yourself, even if it's not not code, or you can be like, hey, I wrote blog posts about this open source project here. You can find it at this website, so people can understand and know why they should contribute to you. I have a friend that does Twitter Spaces about open source projects, and he has a GitHub sponsors, and he's always like, sponsor me. Like after his Twitter Space, he'll say it, and then in the blurb it says like, I do Twitter Spaces about open source projects. So again, it's around, I guess, marketing yourself a bit and positioning the story to show that like you are you're valuable to open source.
I share the opinion totally, and Estella, as I'm working on the same project of how to present myself being non-coder, I'm sure we both can, join hands and see how we can resolve this for the rest of the community who's also searching for the same answer. Also, Scott answered about the previous note that Courtney made. Indeed, engineering doing the sponsorship was a big surprise, like no questions asked, just throwing money at people doing open source maintainers, and I really loved it. Hoping we can make that happen with other companies too. But it's not only about companies. There is another thing that I want to really stress out here. We shouldn't wait for the companies to make the first move. I mean, we are part of the community, and we live together, and we breathe the same air, and we suffer from the same pains, right? So we should also help each other. So I would also like to call all people who are, who understand how hard it is to contribute to on your personal base, But if you have some extra money, and if you see, as you said, it starts with a couple of dollars, and if you're able to actually, support somebody in doing something good, please do. Don't wait for the companies to do that. I mean, in the end, companies are us. So how we stand, the company will also progress. I hope you guys agree with this.
For sure. Yeah, I think about, Estella with the docs. I don't know that I would have figured out what I'm doing if I didn't have docs. Just keep that in mind, right? And so that idea of again, WordPress crowd here, 21 teams in the WordPress space, other open source projects. We were talking about Babel earlier. There is Composer. There's so many layers of what is open source, not just that WordPress itself is open source, but all the things that go into or come through that are also open source. And then look at our server infrastructure and think about the people behind all of that. The people that are doing that type of work. Sometimes they legit need to replace income so that they can afford the time to do the work. Other times, having a little bit of coffee change is enough to keep them motivated when they're just doing it as a side hustle and other things are provided, right? It's a recognition of this work matters and you also matter in that process.
And there is a very interesting note to this as well. Every one of us has certain time to commit to through GitHub to certain projects. How do you know it? When do you know it's enough? Joe, I will start with you first, because I think that's a question that you and I discussed a little bit earlier. So how do you know when it's time to stop contributing?
Yeah, I mean, I try to avoid drawing any kind of direct line between like the amount of compensation I'm seeing in terms of sponsorship and donations and whatnot, and the actual work I do. Because, I mean, first of all, there's a historical fact that I've been contributing for 10 years. I've been getting sponsorship for, a couple years at most. And a lot of that is pretty small. So, in terms of just the bank, as it were, I'm way ahead. But then there's the fact that I also don't want the amount I'm earning to limit what I want to accomplish. And so I tend to focus a lot more on, is this a thing that I want to get done? Is it important to me to get this done now? I work very much on WordPress release cycles. And I tend to do a lot during alpha phases and then kind of pull back during RC, release candidate phases. And then beta is going to be a little bit variable depending on what needs to happen. And that's mostly so that I can have periods of more intense contribution and then take a break. As I can't just do it all the time. But as far as like any given day, like, you know, I will sit back and I'll look at some days, and I'll have spent, you know, 8 hours working on one patch, and then I have to step back and be like, purely by numbers, I probably shouldn't do any more work this week on WordPress. But if I keep just doing that and think about it from an hourly standpoint, this patch is never going to get done. And I mean, I've been working on one now for the last, you know, 2 releases that I just haven't had time to get it 100% done. And there are a lot of projects in WordPress that follow that same pattern. You know, there are things that we would really like to get done, but they are hard. And a lot of that is things where somebody is going to have to decide they're just going to sit down and work on them and not think about the hours too much. But mental health is important. And so I always think of my contributions to WordPress as this can always be done later, because so what if it misses this release? You know, the next release will be a few months later. And so if I'm hitting a mental block, if I'm feeling frustrated, if things aren't going well, if I have just too much other work to do, yeah, WordPress, whatever I'm working on for open source, is going to take a backseat. And WordPress is great that way. And I think this is a difference between WordPress and a lot of the small open source projects with just 1 or 2 maintainers, is if something bad happens in those projects, they just have to fix it. There's nothing, they can't take time. WordPress, there were over 800 contributors to WordPress 6.1. So like, if I need to take a back seat, if it's really important, somebody will step in and deal with it. If it's urgent, if it's immediate, if it's one of my own long-term projects, something that I want to fix. Like, you know, yesterday I was looking at the structure of the settings pages, and they're horrible. They're all built in tables, and they literally cannot support the field set element because of the way they're structured. So you cannot build properly structured groups of radio or checkbox controls. It's not possible. You have to do something else. And this is a really hard problem in WordPress because there's so much plugin code and theme code that is filtering into those controls. Yes, and I see Scott just mentioned the Fields API, and I would love to get that Fields API fixed. But this is one thing I was looking at. I was like, okay, now what can I do? How much of a project is it to just change this? Because it's time. We have to change it. If we don't do it now, we are never going to fix the settings models, and that needs to happen. So hey, Scott, we should talk.
Joe, I also just want to ask, you scheduled WP Accessibility Day right after a major release. What'd you do after that ended? or you scheduled it and then they announced the release date. So yeah, WP Accessibility Day was a 24-hour virtual event focused on accessibility as it relates to WordPress. And
it started like 12 hours after 6.1 released.
Yeah. So that mental health balance, you doing all right?
Yeah, I'm doing fine. I mean, the thing is, WordPress Accessibility Day had a really great crew of organizers, and so the balance has been good. We also we didn't underestimate our fundraising capabilities, so we have the budget to hire out some of those key pieces. Like, you know, right now the videos are all out being professionally captioned for releasing the sessions, and we have people doing that. 2 years ago, that we didn't have enough budget for that, so we got about a quarter of them professionally captioned, and then we had to do the rest. I think I personally did 11 of them. It was, I mean, 11 45-minute long videos is a lot of captioning time.
Minimum 11 days. plus non-English
Um,
speakers. I mean, people whose English is not
yes,
the first language. Yes, I
yeah.
know. I do that
Well, I
after
mean,
each
and we had
meetup.
speakers. Yeah, we had multiple speakers who were deaf or hard of hearing speakers who were also speaking in English, which was not their native language. And the talks were great, but the fact is, when you're sitting down trying to caption these, it's hard work. There are some of those talks, I would normally consider 4 or 5 hours for a 45-minute talk to be reasonable. Some of them, it was more like 10, because you listen to things over and over and over again because you're like, I'm not figuring out what this was. And I can make sense of the sentence and the overall structure of it, but figuring out what the actual words are is what you need for the captions. So yeah, that was hard. That's one of the things about also, though, my kind of pulling back during the release candidate stage is I didn't have any release commitments, and I had been probed at one point about being the accessibility lead for the release, which was never going to happen with that schedule.
Yeah, it's a juggle in the open source space to in the case of WP Accessibility Day, that's a huge event in the WordPress community. It does a lot of good at raising awareness also for those that don't think about accessibility as top of mind all the time. And it's not an official sanctioned event, right? So in the WordPress space, so in different open source communities, they run things in different ways. I just attended my first PHP conference recently, and they don't have a centralized organization that says, this is the official way to do a PHP conference, and we are sanctioning this thing. There, it's very different in all the spaces. And so in WordPress, we have some that are the official ones, and then we have some that are adjacent and do great things for the community. And I think sometimes about our GitHub sponsorship pages, and while I guess in other open source projects, it might look a little different, right? What the sponsorship goes towards, because maybe in the PHP space, it goes right to you working on the PHP docs or the language itself. But then it could also go to, will there ever be enough money to fund the people that organize the events, that bring the community together or do the community management work, right? And so I think about those nuances sometimes of what is official and what is the unofficial. And I think that even with GitHub sponsorships, there's probably some room. I could be wrong on the technicalities, but there's some room to sort of say, here are the things that I do as part of an official open source project, and then here are the other things that I do, and the sponsors can just decide for themselves by reading that what they're going to do.
That's true. Yeah. I will admit I don't mention WordPress Accessibility Day in any way on my GitHub sponsors
You might
page.
want to. You might.
And maybe I should.
Maybe. Yeah.
I founded the event, and I'm co-leading it, and it is significant.
Yeah.
That was my entire month of October.
Yep. And the same thing I think is true for those that organize for meetups. I know we've got a couple of people that are starting to seek. I saw recently. I'm blanking on her name right now, but she's organizing again for WordCamp Europe. And that really becomes a full-time job when you're organizing, especially for the continental ones. Yeah. Wes, I see, is saying, great to see more education around sponsoring open source. Has anyone looked at automated funding of your OS dependencies? Offerings like hanks.dev or stackaid.us. Disclosure, founder here, says Wes.
I'm glad that everybody's learning. I learned a lot. And we're also at the top of the hour. So before we say goodbye to our guests today and the people who came to join us to support this event and people who will be viewing this online, I wanted to ask three of you, being contributors in open source community, do you feel empowered being able to contribute to open source community through GitHub? And how would you define this empowerment?
I can go really quickly.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. For me, like I mentioned earlier, it was like a fear of mine already to contribute to open source. So just being able to get over that fear and feel like I'm actually valuable in the community has been empowering. And like, I don't know, a lot of open source communities have such like really nice people, really welcoming people. So it feels like I'm part of a new group, and I'm helping to give back to different projects. Like I look at the Astro project and I'm like, I added to the documentation. That was me. So yeah, that part feels exciting, and it's like I kind of did something. Yeah.
Joe?
Yeah. So I'm in terms of empowerment, I think one of the biggest changes that happened to me in feeling empowered and also feeling supported was when I was given commit access to WordPress. And that was terrifying. And I was like, oh, wow, I am going to just destroy everything. I'm going to make so many mistakes. And yes, indeed, I have made mistakes. But the reality is that's one of the places where you really see the community come out and be like, okay, hey, yeah, you broke this. It's no big deal. Fix it, whatever. Because, you know, the reality is there's so many checkpoints. We have all of these automated tests. We have so many developers. We have tons of people paying attention. And it's, you know, if you watch a release party and there's, you know, those final commits of now we are actually making this live, it's going out, you know, there are tons of people checking everything over and over and over again. It is extremely thorough. They do a complete dry run of the release process the day before so that, you know, it's protected. You know, this is a community that recognizes that when you're releasing software to 40% of websites, you cannot leave risks in one person's hands. And so having that commit access, it's empowering, but it just so much makes me embrace the community and understand like, okay, yeah, we're all in this together. We all screw things up. I've seen other people make bad commits too. It's, you know, this is nothing new. There's no surprises here. I doubt there are any committers who haven't screwed something up.
You know, I can totally relate to you because I would feel like if I were to choose between driving an airplane and having this button or release button next to me, I would still say, "Can I move to the airplane? I think I will make less damage." So, Courtney, what about you? How do you feel empowered by being part of the open source contributing community?
Yeah. So, as a team rep in the training team, one of the things that we did in the past year was move our project management work from using Trello over to GitHub projects. And in doing so, we have an issue. So our team makes the content that goes on learn.wordpress.org. It is there to be an open source approach to educating WordPress people about WordPress. And we have different content types. The material that Vigelis and others in our attendees area here today are using to instruct their meetup groups, basically a prepared lesson plan for the meetup organizers. We have tutorials, which are short form videos direct for learners. We have longer form courses that are a mixture of text and video at this time. And then we have online workshops, which are like meetup events like this one. And we have those going on around the globe pretty much every weekday. It's a weekday somewhere in the world, so it might not be a weekday where you are, but most of the time it's a weekday somewhere in the globe. So there's a lot of meetups that are going on like that. So our team helps get all of that content going on. And in bringing the material from the project management from Trello over to GitHub and opening an issue for each topic within each of those content types, and then tracking this person made the content, this person proofread the content, this person code tested the content. By doing these things and aligning it to the releases, I've been able to empower the recognition of the people on the team, right? To recognize all of the important work that contributors are doing. Because we brought the management of the projects into GitHub, that opened up a whole lot of opportunity for our team, because in open source, so much of this work is thankless. And as a team rep, I would drown in I sometimes do drown in the administration work of the team, let alone to be tracing down every nuance of each person did which thing. And so by using GitHub projects to help automate that, we're moving closer to a direction where we'll be able to more thoroughly track and recognize whether they edited something inside of WordPress itself or they did something inside of our GitHub repo specifically. Or, they moved an issue along in our Kanban board, whatever the approach there is. It's great to be able to acknowledge that work that other people are doing and to have a more helpful dashboard of maintaining all of the things that we need to take care of. So that has been very empowering in the past year.
That's amazing, Courtney. First of all, thank you very much for inspiring me to organize this meetup and learn more and spread more awareness about how people can improve their life by joining GitHub and joining this great program that Rizel was making us aware of. Rizel, thank you very much for such a great presentation. I feel that my profile needs a lot of updating and understanding what I can do there to look at least, stand up.
No pressure.
No, there is a huge pressure now. But I'm happy.
No.
I'm happy because I learned a lot, and I will make sure that people are aware of this and understand what they're doing. Joe, thank you very much for helping us understand that GitHub sponsors program is actually beneficial, that it's working, that it gives you the freedom to do what you would like, but at the same time, it helps you elevate your well-being. It helps you, it helps you be better in your job, what you do, and recognized as well. And everyone, Estella, Alex, and Scott, and all people who can, EMEA, she was very quiet today, but I'm sure she's listening. Thank you for your spending your time today with us. And I hope to see you soon, already in December. We're going to organize another meetup. So also discovering how people can benefit from different plugins and themes and in WordPress. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope to see you next time. See you.
Thank you.